His fist connected with my cheekbone in the middle of the auction crowd. But he didn't notice who was raising the paddle in the back row, the same person who'd signed the court order sealing his assets. The bruise would fade in days. His forged signatures on my name had festered for a decade. When the gavel fell for the third time, everyone thought I was a crazy bidder. Only he understood every dollar I bid was another piece of sealed evidence coming to light. My name is Nora Beckett, and I've spent the last 6 weeks preparing for this moment at the Ridgestone Auction Hall in Greyhaven, Ridge County. The morning air carried that peculiar smell of old wood and desperation that clings to estate sales fitting, considering Glenn Mercer's construction empire was about to be parceled off to the highest bidder. I arrived early, wearing my brown leather gloves to hide the bruises from our last encounter. Glenn was already there, strutting around like he owned the place, which technically he still did, for another few hours. His gray hair had thinned since Mom married him 15 years ago, but his swagger remained intact despite the foreclosure notices. "Nora," his voice cut through the pre-auction chatter as I examined the lot listings. "We need to talk about the mortgage situation." I kept my eyes on the catalog. Lot 47 Lake Wren Cabin, Lot 23 Industrial Warehouse Lease Rights, Lot 31 Access Road Easements, each item meticulously documented by Ridgestone's staff, unaware they were mapping out my revenge. "Outside, now!" Glenn's hand clamped on my elbow. The crowd parted as he dragged me toward the exit. I could have resisted, but I wanted witnesses. Sure enough, just past the doorway, his control snapped. The shove sent me stumbling into the brick wall, my shoulder taking the impact. "You think you're smart," refusing to co-sign. He cornered me, fist raised. "I know you've been talking to the bank." Security intervened before his fist could connect again. 2 guards in Ridgestone uniforms materialized, creating a human barrier. "Sir, we're going to need you to step back." "She's family," Glenn snarled, but backed away. "Just a misunderstanding." I straightened my blazer, the one I wore to my job at Northbridge Compliance Systems, and smiled. "No misunderstanding. I'll see you inside." The guards escorted me back into the hall, where I chose a seat in the last row. Perfect visibility, quick exit access, and most importantly, anonymous among the crowd of bargain hunters and dealers. I pulled out my notebook, documenting every attendee, every lot number, every nervous twitch on Glenn's face as he stalked back to his preferred spot near the auctioneer's podium. My phone buzzed. "Quinn. Stonebridge Trust registration confirmed. Court orders filed. You ready?" I typed back, "Ready?" The auctioneer, a woman with a voice like gravel and honey, called the room to order. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's estate auction. All sales are final. Payment due within 48 hours. Let's begin with Lot 1. I opened my leather portfolio, checking my ammunition one last time. Emergency seal order from Ridge County Civil Court. Glenn didn't know about this yet. Notification of identity theft claim with supporting forged signatures. Power of attorney for Stonebridge Trust. Listing Marla as the representative. Everything date-stamped, notarized, and ready to deploy. Glenn caught my eye across the room and mouthed something obscene. He still thought this was about the assault, about family drama. He had no idea I'd spent 6 weeks mapping every fraudulent loan, every forged document with my name, every shell company in his web of lies. Mercer and Sons Holdings, Blue Kettle Ventures, all the creative ways he'd been stealing my identity for years while Mom looked the other way. "Lot 12, the auctioneer announced. Commercial-grade table saw. Opening bid at..." Glenn raised his paddle confidently. Of course he did. He planned to buy back his essentials with cash reserves he thought I didn't know about. Cash that would be frozen the moment those court orders hit. I sat back, pen poised over my notebook, and waited. The real show wouldn't start until we reached the lots that mattered, the ones that looked worthless to everyone, except someone who'd spent years studying Glenn's interconnected assets. The warehouse lease that controlled access to his equipment storage. The easements that made his precious lake cabin legally accessible. The puzzle pieces he'd never suspect anyone would want, until it was too late. 6 weeks earlier. I'd been sitting at Mom's kitchen table when Glenn slid the refinancing papers across the scratched wood surface. Just need your signature here. Nora, family, helping family. I'd learned long ago that family in Glenn's vocabulary meant useful. I pushed the papers back. I'm not co-signing anything. His face had darkened, but Mom intervened from the stove. Glenn. She said no. Leave it alone. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it was the beginning of my education in how deep his deceptions ran. 3 nights later, I couldn't sleep. Something nagged at me the way Glenn had folded those papers too quickly. His easy acceptance of my refusal. I drove to my office at Northbridge Compliance Systems at 2 a.m., using my access to run some basic checks I should have done years ago. The first red flag appeared within minutes, a loan application from 3 years back, listing me as co-signer for Mercer & Sons Holdings. The signature looked like mine, close enough to pass a casual glance. But I knew better. The A in Nora was wrong. The B in Beckett too rigid. I cross-referenced it with an old rental agreement I'd signed around the same time. He'd traced it, practiced it, used it. My hands shook as I dug deeper. First Granite Bank, Ridgeland Community Credit Union, even some online lenders. Each search revealed another loan, another forged signature, another chain of debt with my name wrapped around it like a noose. The amounts varied: $15,000 here, $45,000 there, never enough to trigger major scrutiny, always just under the thresholds that would require in-person verification. I printed everything, building my timeline on the conference room wall like a detective mapping a serial killer's movements. 2019. First forgery. A small equipment loan. 2020. 2 more. Hidden behind shell companies. 2021. The pattern accelerated. Glenn had been busy while the world was distracted by the pandemic, exploiting loosened verification procedures and remote notarization. The web was intricate. Mercer & Sons Holdings owned 40% of Blue Kettle Ventures, which held the paper on Harbor Stone LLC, which somehow had my name as a guarantor. Each company led to another, a nauseating spiral of fabricated ownership and fraudulent obligations. But Glenn had made one crucial mistake. He'd gotten sloppy with the notarizations. The same notary public, Sarah Hendricks, appeared on multiple documents. She'd left her position 6 months ago. I called in sick the next morning and drove to Sarah's last known address in Millbrook, a town 30 miles from Greyhaven. She answered the door in nursing scrubs, about to leave for a hospital shift. I remember Glenn, she said after I showed her the documents. Always came in last minute, always cash payments. I thought it was strange. But she studied the signatures. I never met you. He said you were traveling for work. I had her written statement notarized by her neighbor, a legitimate notary this time, and added it to my growing file. But I needed more. The compliance officer in me knew that accusations required evidence, patterns, proof of intent. Over the following weeks, I became a forensic archaeologist of my own stolen identity. I mapped IP addresses from electronic submissions, all traced back to Glenn's home office. I found security footage from bank parking lots, showing Glenn alone, carrying documents he'd claimed I'd signed in person. I discovered Mom's cabin, the one she'd inherited from her parents, had been transferred to one of Glenn's shells and leveraged as collateral. The ethical decision came at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday. Surrounded by bankers' boxes of evidence in my apartment, I could stay silent, protect Mom from the truth, and hope Glenn's house of cards collapsed on its own. Or I could act. I chose to act. The next morning, I filed formal fraud reports with Northbridge's internal system, attached every piece of evidence, and requested medical leave for stress related to family financial crimes. My supervisor didn't ask questions in compliance. We'd seen enough to recognize the signs. Then I called Marla Quinn at Harborline Legal Aid, whom I'd met at a financial literacy workshop. I need help, I said, and I need to do this right. Come in this afternoon, she replied. Bring everything. As I hung up, I thought about Mom, about the conversations we'd never have, about the family dinners that would end. But Glenn had made that choice for us the first time he'd picked up a pen and signed my name to his lies. Marla Quinn's office at Harborline Legal Aid smelled like coffee and justice bitter, necessary, and keeping people awake through long fights. She reviewed my evidence boxes with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen too many financial predators. "This is thorough," she said, adjusting her reading glasses. "Almost too thorough. You sure you're not a lawyer?" "Compliance officer. We're trained to spot patterns." "Good, because what we're about to do requires precision." She pulled out a legal pad. "First, we file the protective order, adult protection, not domestic keeps it clean, focused on the financial abuse. Then we notify the banks, every single one." My phone buzzed. Caleb, my half-brother from Mom's first marriage. The text was typical, Caleb. "Heard Glenn hit you. Want me to return the favor?" I showed Marla, who shook her head. "No vigilante justice. We do this clean." I texted back, "No, but I need your help with something legal." 20 minutes later, Caleb walked into Marla's office, still in his mechanic's coveralls. He'd driven straight from work, oil under his fingernails, fury in his eyes. "Whatever you need, Nora." Marla outlined the strategy. Protective order first that would create an official record and restrict Glenn's ability to approach me, then the identity theft claims, filed simultaneously with every financial institution. The key was timing everything needed to hit before Glenn could move assets or create new shells. "What about Mom?" Caleb asked. "She's not implicated," I said. "I made sure every forged document was Glenn alone. But the house is in her name only. Glenn never touched it. One small mercy in this mess. He went after everything else, but he needed her cooperation for the house, and she'd never give it." Marla pulled up the court filing system. "Now, here's where it gets interesting. Greyhaven's estate sale laws require full disclosure of liens and disputes. Once we file these documents and notify Ridgestone Auction House, they're legally obligated to flag any lots connected to disputed assets." "Which is most of them," I said. "Exactly, but Glenn won't know until the moment of sale. The notifications will be sealed until triggered by a completion of purchase." She smiled, the kind of smile that made predatory lenders nervous. "He'll bid thinking he's buying back his life. Instead, he'll be funding his own investigation." Caleb leaned forward. "What about the stuff he really needs, the equipment, the properties?" That's when I explained about Stonebridge Trust. Marla would serve as the public face, a shell of our own, but a legal one. The trust would bid on strategic pieces, not the obvious valuable lots, but the overlooked connective tissue that made everything else work. "The warehouse lease includes access rights to the loading dock," I explained. "Without it, the storage units are basically expensive closets. The road easements make the Lake Wren cabin accessible. Without them, it's a $200,000 prison surrounded by private property." Caleb whistled. "You're not trying to take everything. You're trying to make everything he takes worthless." "Limited resources," Marla added. "We can't outbid him on the big items, but we can make sure those big items become very expensive paperweights." We spent the next 3 weeks in preparation. Court filings happened in waves protective order approved. Identity theft claims acknowledged. Evidence preservation orders sent to banks, phone companies, and the county records office. Each document was a tightening coil around Glenn's finances. Caleb proved invaluable. His mechanical mind saw connections I'd missed. "The truck fleet," he said one evening, reviewing the auction catalog. "Look at Lot 18. Miscellaneous vehicle documentation. That's got to include the commercial permits. Without those, his trucks are just oversized personal vehicles." Marla created Stonebridge Trust with elegant simplicity. Funded with $50,000, my entire savings plus a loan from Caleb, it looked like any other investment vehicle. The registration with Ridgestone listed Marla as the representative, keeping my name invisible. "He's going to recognize you," I told Marla. "I'm counting on it. He'll think you hired a lawyer to bid out of spite. He won't realize the trust's real purpose until it's too late." The final piece fell into place 2 days before the auction. First Granite Bank's risk department confirmed they would freeze any proceeds from the sale pending investigation of the identity theft claims. The freeze wouldn't stop the sale, but it would trap Glenn's money in legal limbo. He'll bid everything he has, I predicted. Glenn's ego won't let him lose publicly. Good, Marla said. The more he spends on frozen assets, the less he has for lawyers. The night before the auction, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking my phone, expecting Glenn to somehow discover our plan, but his social media showed him confident, even boastful. Taking back what's mine tomorrow, he'd posted. Some people forget who built this town. Caleb texted at 3 a.m. You sure about this? No, I replied, but I'm doing it anyway. That's my sister. See you there. I looked at the brown leather gloves on my dresser, covering the bruises that had become evidence. Tomorrow, Glenn would learn that some signatures couldn't be forged, some trust couldn't be stolen, and some auctions had already been won before the first bid was placed. The paper trail led deeper than I'd imagined. What started as tracking forged signatures became an excavation of Glenn's entire financial skeleton, and the bones were dirty. The family assets Glenn boasted about were a house of cards built on other people's names. The Lake Wren cabin, Mom's inheritance from her parents, had been quietly transferred to one of Glenn's shell companies 3 years ago. The deed transfer showed Mom's signature, but when I compared it to her recent birthday cards, the handwriting was Glenn's rushed approximation. He practiced on her too, I told Marla, spreading the documents across her conference table. Not just me, anyone whose signature could unlock value. The revelation changed our strategy. This wasn't just identity theft, it was systematic asset stripping using forged documents as keys. The cabin alone was worth $300,000, leveraged twice through different lenders who didn't know about each other. I dove into the construction equipment next. Every truck, every tool claimed as Mercer family legacy, traced back to suspicious transfers. The paper trail revealed Glenn's method purchase equipment through legitimate business loans, transfer ownership to shell companies using forged partner signatures, then leverage the clean assets for more loans. Blue Kettle Ventures, I muttered, tracking another thread. The LLC owned paper on half of Glenn's visible assets, but its registered agent was a mailbox in Delaware. The funding sources led to a web of transfers designed to obscure Origin classic money laundering tactics I'd studied in compliance training. Caleb found the smoking gun by accident. He'd been checking VIN numbers on the truck fleet when he noticed registration discrepancies. Nora, these trucks were reported stolen in 2019, then mysteriously recovered and sold to Mercer & Sons. Insurance fraud, Marla said immediately. He probably collected the payout and bought them back cheap through a shell. The construction supplies told a similar story. Invoices for premium materials, billed to clients. But the actual purchases showed cheap alternatives. The difference, sometimes $30,000 per project, vanished into Blue Kettle Ventures accounts. We need to be careful, Marla warned. This is bigger than civil court. This is criminal. But I was already planning. The auction would be more than revenge. It would be evidence preservation. Every lot Glenn bought would be frozen, documented, available for investigators. And the lots Stonebridge Trust acquired would protect the paper trail from destruction. I found the final piece while reviewing property easements. The industrial access road didn't just serve the warehouse, it was the only legal route to 3 of Glenn's construction sites. Without it, his equipment couldn't reach active projects. The easement was bundled with Lot 31 listed as miscellaneous property rights. Most bidders would ignore it as worthless paper. He doesn't know, I realized. Glenn's focused on the physical assets. He doesn't understand that the real value is in the access rights. Marla smiled grimly. Contract Law 101, you can own the castle, but if you don't own the drawbridge. We refined our target list. Lot 31 for the access rights, Lot 18 for the vehicle documentation, Lot 44. Office records and files, which likely contained originals of Glenn's fraudulent papers, small lots that looked like scraps, but held the keys to everything else. The deeper I dug, the more victims emerged. Subcontractors paid with bad checks written on closed accounts, suppliers holding worthless promissory notes, Even Sarah Hendricks, the notary, had been paid in cash to avoid records, making her an unwitting accomplice to fraud. Ridge County needs to know about this, Caleb said after reviewing my findings. This isn't just about you anymore. He was right. I compiled a comprehensive report for the county's Financial Fraud Investigation Unit, careful to document everything without accusation, just facts, patterns, and evidence, the kind of report that would trigger automatic investigation once filed. But timing remained critical. File too early, and Glenn might get wind of it, liquidate what he could. File too late, and evidence might disappear. The auction was our window. Glenn would be exposed, overextended, and unable to maneuver. I prepared 3 sealed envelopes for auction day. Envelope: a court order for preliminary injunction on the cabin and equipment warehouse, citing disputed ownership pending investigation. Envelope B: identity theft. Claim documentation with signature comparisons, ready for immediate filing with the auction house. Envelope C: Stonebridge Trust authorization and proof of funds, showing clear money for clean purchases. You know he'll try to intimidate you, Marla said the night before. Men like Glenn don't lose gracefully. Let him try. Every threat, every confrontation just adds to the evidence file. I spent that evening with the auction catalog, memorizing lot numbers and descriptions. Glenn would focus on the showcase items: the cabin, the trucks, the warehouse. While he fought for those trophies, I'd quietly collect the keys that made them worthless. Mom called around 10 p.m. Glenn says you're trying to ruin him. No, Mom, he ruined himself. I'm just documenting it. Silence. Then, quietly, be careful tomorrow. I will. And Mom, check your bank statements. All of them. After we hung up, I made final preparations. Clothes laid out professional but forgettable. Documents organized in my portfolio. Backup copies secured in Caleb's truck and Marla's office safe. Phone charged. Recording app ready. The forecast called for clear skies tomorrow. Perfect weather for an estate sale. Perfect weather for everything built on lies to finally come crashing down. The dominoes started falling 3 days before the auction. First Granite Bank's risk management department had finally connected the dots between my identity theft claims and their exposure to Glenn's loan portfolio. Ms. Beckett, the risk officer said during our conference call, we've identified 17 transactions requiring investigation. Your documentation has been illuminating. Translation: they'd realized their underwriting had been catastrophically lax. The fear of regulatory scrutiny was palpable through the phone. We're placing administrative holds on all related accounts pending investigation, she continued. Any disbursements from the estate sale will be similarly restricted. One domino down. The Ridge County Financial Fraud Investigation Unit moved faster than I'd expected. Detective Morrison called within hours of receiving my report. This is extensive, he said. We'll need to coordinate with state authorities given the interstate LLC structures. The auction is in 3 days, I reminded him. We won't interfere with the sale, but we'll be monitoring, document everything. 2 dominoes down. Glenn, meanwhile, was projecting confidence like a beacon. He'd been spotted at Greyhaven Mutual Bank lobbying for a bridge loan, at the country club recruiting private investors, even at a pawn shop evaluating Mom's jewelry. The desperation beneath his bravado was showing. He's liquefying everything, Caleb reported from his network of mechanics and contractors, selling tools, calling in favors, even trying to offload project contracts at a loss. Good. He'll need every penny for the auction. The psychological warfare began subtly. Marla, establishing Stonebridge Trust's credibility, made strategic inquiries at Ridgestone about substantial purchases and bulk lot acquisitions. Word traveled fast in Greyhaven's small business community. By evening, Glenn had heard about a mystery buyer interested in his assets. His first call came at 11 p.m. I know what you're doing, he snarled into my voicemail. You think you can steal what I built? I'll bury you in court for the next decade. I forwarded the recording to Marla and Detective Morrison. Evidence file, subsection threats and intimidation. The second call came at 2 a.m., this time, Mom's number, Glenn's voice in the background. Tell her to back off. Elaine, this is family business. Mom's voice, tired but firm. She's not answering. Glenn, leave her alone. The sound of a door slamming. Then Mom, quietly. He's gone to the workshop. Nora, if you get this, do what you need to do. By morning, Glenn's strategy had shifted. He showed up at Northbridge Compliance Systems, demanding to speak with my supervisor about my vendetta and mental instability. Security removed him after 20 minutes of shouting in the lobby, another gift for the evidence file. Marla called with an update. Ridgestone confirmed receipt of our sealed notifications. They'll be held by their legal department until triggered by sale completion. And Glenn, registered as a bidder, put down a $50,000 deposit, probably everything he could scrape together. The pieces were aligning. Glenn had mobilized every resource for the auction, convinced he could buy back his empire and deal with the legal challenges later. He didn't understand that later had been engineered away. That afternoon, I visited First Granite again, this time with Marla. We met with their senior counsel, a woman named Patricia Stern who looked like she'd aged 5 years in the past week. The bank's position is clear, she said. Any funds from tomorrow's auction related to disputed assets will be held in escrow pending resolution of the fraud investigation. For how long? Marla asked. Minimum 90 days, potentially years if criminal charges are filed. Glenn would bid everything he had on frozen assets. Even if he eventually cleared some legal hurdles, the immediate cash flow strangulation would be fatal to his remaining business. That evening, Caleb helped me run final reconnaissance at Ridgestone. The lots were displayed for preview Glenn's life laid out in numbered sections. The Lake Wren cabin photos looked pristine, hiding the forged deed beneath its surface. The trucks gleamed under the warehouse lights, their stolen and recovered history invisible to casual observers. Out of 31, I pointed to a small table holding manila folders. Those easement rights, without them, half his properties become islands. Caleb studied the documentation. Opening bid is only $500. Nobody realizes what these control. Glenn doesn't either. He's too focused on the big tickets. We identified 6 critical lots small, overlooked, but essential. Our $50,000 war chest would be more than enough if we stayed disciplined, avoided ego bidding, and let Glenn exhaust himself on the showcase items. The final pre-auction surprise came from an unexpected source. Sarah Hendricks, the former notary, called Marla directly. I've been thinking about those documents. There's something else Glenn paid me to backdate some notarizations. I have records, cash amounts, dates, everything. Another domino, this one potentially criminal. Marla arranged for Sarah to provide a sworn affidavit after the auction, keeping her safe from any pre-sale intimidation. I went to bed early, but sleep wouldn't come. Tomorrow would be either vindication or disaster. No middle ground. In a few hours, Glenn would enter Ridgestone believing he could buy back his life. He had no idea the auction house had become a courtroom, the bidders a jury, and every raised paddle another count in his upcoming indictment. The brown leather gloves lay ready on my dresser. Evidence transformed into armor. Tomorrow, I'd wear them into battle. The Ridgestone auction hall filled with the peculiar energy of financial vultures circling distressed assets. I arrived at 8 a.m., 2 hours before the gavel would fall, wearing my brown leather gloves and carrying my portfolio like a shield. The setup was theater in its purest form, lots displayed on tables around the room's perimeter, spotlights highlighting the premium items. The auctioneer's podium dominated center stage, flanked by Ridgestone staff with computers to record bids and process payments. Every seat had a clear view of both the lots and the other bidders nowhere to hide. Glenn was already there, holding court near the Lake Wren cabin photos. He'd dressed for success in his best suit, the one he wore to city council meetings when he still had influence. His confidence radiated as he glad-handed other bidders, warning them off his lots with barely veiled threats. Beautiful property, he was telling a younger couple. Been in my family for generations. I'd hate for someone to buy it and discover all the complications with lake access. Lies wrapped in intimidation. The cabin had been in Mom's family, and the lake access was public, but the couple moved on, unwilling to challenge him. I took my seat in the back row as planned. Caleb entered separately, choosing a middle section where he could monitor the room. Marla arrived last, professionally dressed, with a Stonebridge Trust bitter paddle number 47 visible in her hand. Glenn's eyes tracked her movement, his jaw tightening. Good. Let him wonder. The room filled steadily. I cataloged the attendees: property developers hoping for cheap land, equipment dealers seeking inventory, curiosity seekers drawn by the drama of a fallen contractor's empire. Detective Morrison stood near the exit, dressed in civilian clothes but fooling no one with law enforcement experience. At 9:45, the Ridgestone legal representative, a thin man named Garrett, approached the podium for announcements. Ladies and gentlemen, a few reminders. All sales are final. Payment is due within 48 hours. Any lots with title disputes or legal encumbrances will be noted at the time of sale. Glenn's posture shifted slightly. First hint that something was off. Additionally, Garrett continued, some lots may be subject to post-sale review based on documentation provided to Ridgestone. Buyers assume all risks related to asset verification. Legal language for some of these lots might be toxic. Buyer beware. The auctioneer, the same gravel and honey voice from my earlier visit, took the podium at 10 a.m. sharp. Good morning, everyone. Let's begin with Lot 1 industrial shelving units. Opening bid. The early lots went quickly. Glenn bid selectively, winning some construction tools and supplies. He was pacing himself, saving resources for the big targets. I made notes of every purchase, every dollar committed. Lot 18 arrived faster than expected. Miscellaneous vehicle documentation and permits. Opening bid, 200. Silence. Papers weren't sexy. Nobody wanted to buy filing cabinets full of registration forms. $200. Marla raised her paddle. $500. Glenn countered immediately, recognizing the threat. $750. 1,500. His voice carried warning. Marla paused, calculated, then lowered her paddle. Let him have it. Let him pay 7 times the opening bid for papers he thought were routine. I watched Glenn's mental math. He'd allocated maybe $1,000 for that lot. Now he was $500 over, his carefully planned budget already cracking. The morning progressed strategically. Marla bid on several lots she had no intention of winning, driving Glenn's prices higher each time. Lot 23, the warehouse lease, went for $15,000 instead of the expected $8,000. Lot 28, a batch of specialized tools, hit $12,000 when Glenn panicked about losing them. By the lunch break, Glenn had spent $67,000 of his roughly $150,000 war chest, and the premium lots hadn't even appeared. During the break, he cornered Marla near the coffee station. I couldn't hear the words, but his body language screamed threat. Marla simply smiled, showed him her bidder credentials, and walked away. 2 security guards shadowed Glenn after that. The afternoon session opened with Lot 31. Property easements and access rights. Opening bid, $500. This was it. The keystone that would lock or unlock everything else. $500. A property developer offered, probably thinking he'd found a bargain. $1,000. Marla countered. $2,000. Glenn's voice cut through, finally understanding the danger. $3,000. $5,000. The developer dropped out, confused by the aggressive bidding for paper rights. It was just Glenn and Stonebridge Trust now. $7 and $500, Glenn snarled. $10,000, Marla responded calmly. I watched Glenn's face cycle through calculations. He had maybe $80,000 left, and the cabin, his emotional prize, was coming up. Could he afford to spend an eighth of his remaining funds on easements? $12,000, he bid. $15,000. The room held its breath. Glenn's fists clenched. $20,000. Marla made a show of considering, then shook her head. Glenn had won, But at 4 times what he'd budgeted, his reserves were hemorrhaging. The setup was perfect. Glenn thought he'd protected his flank by securing the easements. He didn't know about Envelope A in my portfolio, the injunction that would freeze them the moment he paid. He'd just spent $20,000 on papers he couldn't use. More lots passed. The warehouse itself went for $45,000 to Glenn after another bidding war with Marla, the equipment inside for another $30,000. His funds were nearly exhausted, and we hadn't even reached the cabin. When Lot 44. Office records and files came up. Marla took it for $3,000 with only token resistance from Glenn. He couldn't afford to protect everything. Finally, the moment everyone had been waiting for. Lot 47, the Lake Wren cabin property. Beautiful 3-bedroom on 2 acres of lakefront. Opening bid $50,000. Glenn raised his paddle before the auctioneer finished speaking. $75,000. Aggressive opening. He was trying to scare off competition. Several interested parties did lower their paddles. $80,000 a developer called out. $100,000, Glenn countered. $110,000. $125,000. I watched Glenn's desperation mount. This was his crown jewel, the symbol of everything he'd built. Losing it publicly would be emasculation. $150,000, he shouted. The developer hesitated. The cabin's market value was maybe $175,000 in good conditions. With the estate sale taint, $150,000 was near the ceiling. $160,000, the developer tried. $200,000, Glenn roared. Silence. The developer shook his head and lowered his paddle. Glenn had won, but he'd destroyed himself to do it. I did the math. He'd spent at least $50,000 more than he'd brought. He'd need bridge financing just to complete the purchase. Sold to bidder 15 for $200,000, the auctioneer announced. Congratulations, Mr. Mercer. The room applauded politely. Glenn tried to smile, but sweat beaded on his forehead. He'd won his prizes, but had no idea he'd just financed his own investigation. Time for the finale. Lot 47 sold to Mr. Mercer for $200,000. The auctioneer repeated, "Please see the cashier to arrange payment within 48 hours." Glenn stood, victorious, ready to claim his prize. That's when Marla made her move. "Excuse me," she called out, approaching Garrett at the legal desk. "I have documentation relevant to that sale." She handed over envelopes A and B in full view of the crowd. Garrett's eyes widened as he scanned the contents, the injunction, the identity theft claims, the forged signatures linking the cabin to fraudulent loans. "Mr. Mercer," Garrett's voice carried across the suddenly silent room, "please approach the desk." Glenn's triumph curdled. He stalked forward, shoulders rigid. "What's this about?" "We've received court documentation indicating this property is subject to an emergency seal order pending investigation of identity theft and fraud. Additionally, there are claims that signatures on the property transfer were forged." The room erupted in whispers. Bidders craned necks to see. Detective Morrison stepped closer to the action. "That's bullshit," Glenn snarled. "I own that cabin free and clear." "Perhaps, sir, but until the courts determine the validity of these claims, the sale proceeds will be held in escrow. You're still obligated to pay the $200,000 within 48 hours. But you won't receive clear title until the legal matters are resolved." Glenn's face cycled through colors I'd never seen in nature. "This is her doing," he spun, searching the crowd. "Where is she, Nora? I know you're here." I stood slowly, removing my brown leather gloves to reveal the fading bruises beneath. The symbolism wasn't lost on the crowd. "I'm right here, Glenn." "You vindictive little—" He started toward me, but security intercepted him. "Mr. Mercer," the auctioneer intervened. "We need to continue with the remaining lots. Please complete your paperwork or leave the premises." Glenn looked ready to explode. He'd won the cabin but couldn't touch it. Spent money he didn't have on an asset frozen by the courts, and everyone was watching. "There are more lots," someone called out. "What's left?" The auctioneer consulted her list. Several items deferred from the morning session, including Lot 52, the access road connecting to Highway 47. My breath caught. That wasn't on the original catalog. They'd added it during lunch, probably from reserves, the main artery that made the industrial sites functional. Opening bid $5,000. Glenn looked stricken. He'd exhausted his funds on the frozen assets. Without that road access, even the properties he owned outright would be landlocked. Foss. Marla raised paddle 47. $7.500 a developer tried. $10,000. I watched Glenn frantically check his phone, probably trying to secure immediate financing. But who would lend to him now, with fraud allegations public and his main assets frozen? $15,000, Marla continued calmly. $20,000 the developer pushed. $30,000. The developer calculated, then withdrew. Sold to bidder 47 Stonebridge Trust for $30,000. Glenn's empire had just been bisected. He owned properties he couldn't access and had access to properties he couldn't use. The beautiful asymmetry of it made my compliance officer heart sing. But we weren't done, lot by lot. Stonebridge Trust acquired the connective tissue of Glenn's former business, the utility easements, the equipment storage contracts, the permits and licenses tied to specific locations rather than companies. Each purchase was strategic, surgical, devastating. Glenn tried to leave twice, both times. Garrett reminded him of outstanding paperwork and payment obligations. He was trapped by his own victories, forced to watch as his assets were dissected around him. Finally, the last lot sold office furniture to a startup for $5,000. The auctioneer smiled. That concludes today's sale. Winning bidders. Please see the cashier. Thank you all for attending. The crowd began dispersing, but the drama wasn't over. Glenn, paperwork clutched in shaking hands, spotted me near the exit. You destroyed everything, he hissed, security guards flanking him. Your mother will never forgive you. I didn't destroy anything, I replied, loud enough for lingering bidders to hear. You did that yourself every time you forged a signature, every fake loan, every fraudulent transfer. I just made sure you paid market price for your crimes. The cabin was your mother's inheritance, which you stole by forging her signature, just like you forged mine. How many others? Glenn, how many names did you practice in that workshop? His face went white. Behind him, Detective Morrison had moved closer, hand resting casually near his concealed badge. Mr. Mercer, Garrett called out, we need to discuss your payment arrangements. The $200,000 for the cabin, plus $95,000 for your other purchases. Will that be wire transfer or certified check? $295,000. Glenn had maybe $150,000 available, and that was before the frozen assets. He'd bid himself into bankruptcy. I need more time, Glenn stammered. I'm afraid the terms are clear. 48 hours or the lots default and your deposit is forfeit. Additionally, you'd be barred from future Ridgestone auctions. Public humiliation, financial ruin, legal jeopardy. The trifecta was complete. Marla appeared at my elbow. The trust's payments are complete. We took possession of the files from Lot 44. Interesting reading. Seems someone kept very detailed records of their forgeries, practiced signatures, even dated. Glenn lunged, but security was ready. They pinned him against the wall as Detective Morrison finally revealed his badge. Mr. Mercer, I think we need to talk. You're not under arrest yet, but you might want to contact a lawyer. As they escorted him out, Glenn managed one last look back. Our eyes met across the emptying auction hall. He'd entered believing money could buy back his crimes. Instead, he'd learned that every dollar spent was just another link in the chain of evidence. Sold, I whispered, too quiet for anyone but Marla to hear. To the highest bidder. The final gavel hadn't even cooled when Glenn made his last desperate play. As security and Detective Morrison flanked him near the exit, he yanked out his phone and started recording. This is theft, he shouted at the lens. Conspiracy. My stepdaughter and her lawyer are... Mr. Mercer, Morrison interrupted calmly, I'd advise against self-incrimination on social media. But Glenn was beyond reason. Spittle flew as he ranted about family betrayal and stolen legacy. The remaining crowd watched like rubberneckers at a highway crash, horrified but unable to look away. That's when Marla delivered the killing blow. She approached the cashier's desk and spoke clearly, ensuring her words carried, "Stonebridge Trust would like to complete payment for all lots. Also, please note that we'll be donating the office files from Lot 44 to the Ridge County Financial Fraud Unit, in the interest of justice." Glenn's rant cut off mid-sentence. Those files contained his practice signatures, the forged documents, everything. His own meticulous records would hang him. "You can't, those are private." "We're private," I corrected, stepping forward. "Until you put them up for public auction. Stonebridge Trust bought them fair and square. What the new owners do with their property is their business." The awful understanding finally hit him. Every move we'd made had been legal, documented, above board, while he'd operated in shadows with forged signatures and shell companies. We'd acted in broad daylight with real money and court orders. "The cabin," he said weakly. "At least the cabin." Garrett from Ridgestone's legal team shook his head. "Mr. Mercer, you have 47 hours and 18 minutes to deliver $295,000 in cleared funds. Until then, you own nothing but obligations." Security escorted Glenn out as he muttered about lawyers and appeals, but I knew the truth. He'd call every attorney in 3 counties and find none willing to take a case built on forgery and fraud, not when the evidence was already in police custody. The auction hall emptied except for staff and our small team. Caleb emerged from his middle row seat, grinning like he'd just watched his favorite movie. "That was beautiful, sis." When he realized the road access was gone, he whistled appreciatively. "It's not about revenge," I said, though we both knew that was only partially true. "It's about stopping him from doing this to anyone else." Marla finished the paperwork, officially transferring Stonebridge Trust's purchases, the access roads, the easements, the permits, all the invisible framework that made Glenn's properties functional. Without them, his remaining assets were expensive islands. "What's the plan for these?" Caleb asked. "Fair market leasebacks to legitimate businesses," Marla explained. "The trust will generate enough income to cover today's purchases within 3 years. After that, pure profit that can fund more fraud victim advocacy. Turning Glenn's weapons into shields for future victims. There was poetry in that." My phone buzzed. Glenn's packing. Says he's leaving town. Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Mom, are you—" A long pause. Then, "The bank called. They're reversing the cabin transfer since Glenn forged my signature. I get my parents' place back." My throat tightened. I hadn't expected that. "Mom, that's wonderful." "Nora, thank you for everything, for being stronger than I was." We said goodbye, and I tucked the phone away. Around me, Ridgestone staff were cataloging the day's sales, unaware they'd just hosted the dismantling of a criminal enterprise. Detective Morrison approached before leaving. "We'll need your full statement tomorrow. Marla's already agreed to turn over the files. Between that and the notary's testimony, we should have enough for federal charges." Federal, because Glenn's fraud had crossed state lines with his Delaware shells. He'd face more than bankruptcy, he'd face prison. As we prepared to leave, I took one last look at the auction hall. In a few hours, this space had transformed from Glenn's hoped-for resurrection to his public cremation, the podium where his dreams died, the desk where his crimes were exposed, the exit where he'd left in handcuffs of debt and disgrace. "No regrets?" Marla asked, reading my expression. "None," I said, pulling on my brown leather gloves. The bruises beneath had faded to yellow-green, almost healed. He had countless chances to stop, to be honest, to be the man Mom thought she married. He chose this. We walked out together, lawyer, mechanic, compliance officer, an unlikely team united by justice and careful planning. Behind us, Ridgestone staff began breaking down the displays, packing away the remnants of Glenn Mercer's empire. In my car, I found one final document, the original rental agreement Glenn had used to forge my first signature. Caleb must have slipped it onto my seat. Across the bottom, in Glenn's distinctive handwriting, he'd practiced my name over and over, evidence of when this all began. I started the engine, planning my route to the district attorney's office. Glenn thought he'd lost everything today, but he was wrong. Today was just the down payment. The real cost would come when prosecutors unpacked every fraudulent deal, every forged document, every stolen identity. The auctioneer had been right about one thing: all sales were final, and Glenn had just sold his future for the price of his past. As I drove through Greyhaven's quiet streets, I thought about Mom in her reclaimed cabin, Caleb returning to his honest work, and Marla preparing to help the next victim. Glenn was gone, his shadow lifted from all our lives. Justice, served at market price. The highest bidder had won. Thank you for listening to this story of justice served cold and calculated. I'm curious, where are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let's connect over our shared love of stories, where the wronged finally get their moment of triumph. If this tale of legal revenge resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. And if you really want to help more people discover stories like this one, hit the hype button to boost this video. Until next time, remember, the best revenge is a life well documented.